Well, good morning, everyone. I am Dr. James Pitts from California State University of Fresno, and today I'll be discussing how the justice system can be used to justify reparations as it pertains to slavery and contemporary slavery. Unfortunately, Black Americans continue to endure persistent inequalities resulting from slavery, and in some ways, continue to be subjected to involuntary servitude, much like slaves. The evidence of this is found in substantial racial disparities, both legally and socioeconomically. Across the board, Blacks are more disadvantaged than other groups. In terms of income, we tend to earn about half on average of that of our white counterparts. In terms of wealth, we have less assets to pass down to our future generations. In terms of unemployment, we tend to find ourselves being unemployed at twice the rate of white Americans. And even in terms of inheritance, we don't have as much to offer to our future generations of children. So Blacks more often live in communities of poverty. And because of this, criminological theory justifies the over-policing of Black people by arguing that areas of poverty are more likely to have crime. Thus, the economic disadvantages that contribute to the over-policing of Black communities and results in an increased rate of police encounters for us as Blacks. These encounters lead to more disparities in terms of traffic stops like those you just heard from our previous presenter, greater chances of automobiles being searched, more arrests, a greater likelihood of police use of force, police misconduct, and even more often we are killed by police. Thus, in terms of police brutality, Blacks are victimized at much greater rates while often being unarmed, right? Often while in police custody, we are brutalized by police while being handcuffed and even face down in prone positions despite being compliant with officer commands. Such excessive force and or unnecessary lethal force often results from verbal exchanges or in the aftermath of nonviolent misdemeanor offenses like the failure to pay one's child support, as in the case of Walter Scott, the failure to appear for minor traffic violation, as in the case of Dante Wright, or for being suspected of passing a counterfeit $20 bill, as in the case of George Floyd. You know, it's no wonder we have strained relationships in our communities with police. Historically, police have, one might argue, have been the mechanism by which a system of racial and socioeconomic inequality has been perpetuated in America. Strangely, nowadays we embark on the practice of community policing intended to improve relationships between police and citizens without even acknowledging the harm that has been done by a system of injustice. What we must consider is that without acknowledgement, reconciliation becomes much less likely. You might ask, well, how is it that this mechanism that I refer to as police has contributed to this racial and socioeconomic equality? Many of the points made by the previous researcher or professor are very accurate, so I won't continue with as many stats. Nonetheless, when we consider policies that are often race neutral on their face, but applied in a very discriminatory manner, this is the method by which we find ourselves victims of substantial disparities at the hands of our criminal justice system. Things like stop and frisk in New York State, which was recently declared unconstitutional by the United States Supreme Court. Stop and frisk was based on the policy of reasonable suspicion, a much lower standard than probable cause, which gave police the authority to round up on anybody they felt like was suspicious, even though there was no evidence of the individual committing a crime. While this policy was neutral on its face, it was applied primarily to Blacks and other minority communities. Similarly, the war on drugs has been noted as a process by which we have ensured that Blacks are disadvantaged. And the war on drugs has primarily been fought in Black communities. Things like the crack cocaine disparity that led to disparities in sentencing between crack cocaine and powder cocaine, where roughly 5 grams of crack cocaine would get you a life sentence, whereas 500 grams of cocaine, powder cocaine would be necessary for the same sentence. The reason this is important is because crack is a drug that is primarily pushed in poverty-stricken communities. Powder cocaine is a drug that is more often attributed to people of wealth. And so when we see this sort of substantial disparity, despite the fact that crack is an impure substance, often cut with other substances like baking powder, considering that it's impure substance, it's strange that we criminalize that particular drug more heavily. Furthermore, through the practice of qualified immunity, in the aftermath of police violence and police misconduct, often our police officers are not held accountable to the same degree as the rest of us citizens. Often they are able to get their cases dismissed in court through summary judgment if that particular incident has not been one that has been adjudicated on similar circumstances in the past. And when I say similar circumstances, I mean almost identical. So in this regard, considering the atrocities that we just discussed, police in many ways constitute the gatekeepers to a system that unjustly and systematically subjects a disproportionate number of Black Americans to injustice. This over-policing leads to even more legal disparities for Black Americans, as our previous presenter just stated. Due to lower socioeconomic status, Blacks are less likely to be successful in court. We're less likely to be able to afford cash bail, less likely to be able to afford a private attorney, and to the extent that you can't post bail, research indicates there's much greater chance of you receiving a harsher sentence. To the extent that you must rely on the services of a public defender rather than a private attorney, it becomes much more likely that an individual will receive incarceration in the aftermath of their court case. Thus, this greater likelihood of incarceration contributes to the disadvantage that we as Black Americans experience in court, thereby leading to a system of mass incarceration. Jeffrey Ryman entitled his book, The Rich Get Richer and the Poor Get Prison. Michelle Alexander entitled her book, New Jim Crow. Each of these describing the American penal system in similar yet graphic detail. Angela Davis, many decades ago, famously coined the phrase prison industrial complex to describe the marriage between prison and industry that characterizes contemporary corrections. What we need to be mindful of is that mass incarceration is reminiscent of slavery. Inmates can be forced to work for free. In fact, many states make inmate labor mandatory. The 13th Amendment, while it was supposed to abolish slavery, says that neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as punishment, for a crime, will exist in the United States. The key phrase here is except as punishment for a crime. In fact, it is customary to refer to an inmate as a slave of the state. Thus, the criminal justice system can and has been used to perpetuate the inequalities resulting from slavery, while also maintaining an underclass of people known as criminals, ex-convicts, and inmates. In short, the 13th Amendment only abolished slavery in terms of private ownership of another individual. Essentially, we still have slavery, simply by another name. The government can own as many slaves as they would like. Is this not simply slavery by another name, you might ask? Where minorities account for more than 65% of the prison population. Well, 1 in 3 Blacks will be in jail or in prison at some point in their life. Well, Blacks account for 35% of the prison population, but only 13% of the general population. Well, we as Blacks are more than 3 times more likely to be incarcerated than our white counterparts. Well, white Americans account for 62% of the population, but only 34% of the prison population. Is this not slavery by another name? Every day, Blacks are still living the struggle, still trying to catch up in a race where many other people seem to have a head start, in a race where other races or races often have been given better equipment, come from better neighborhoods that provide better training, in a race where other races other races of people come from a lineage that has not been cut off from their history or their heritage or their legacy. In a race where our Black Americans are delayed at the starting line, often tripped before the finish line, and try to use mechanisms to make it impossible to finish the race, such that we never establish generational wealth, such that we more often come from broken homes and single-parent families due to mass incarceration and poverty, such that we always experience the hopelessness and helplessness of a society that continues to blame us for our own oppression, repression, and resulting disadvantages. Thank you for allowing me to participate in this inquiry.